Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Vikram Sarabhai Library, I am Ahmedabad. I, Reena Patel, welcome you to all our online book talk program. For today's book talk we have with us Miss Shrayana Bhattacharya, the author of the book Desperately Seeking Shah Rukh, India's Lonely Young Woman and the Search for Intimacy and Independence, published by HarperCollins of India. We would like to thank Ms. Shrayana Bhattacharya for kindly having agreed to review her newly published book. I also welcome Professor Tarun Jain, Professor Chinmay Tumbe, Professor Namrata Ma'am, Professor Naudip Mathur for joining this book talk, online book talk. Professor Tarun Jain from IIM Ahmedabad for joining the conversation with Ms. Shrayana Bhattacharya later on. Before we start the book talk, I would like to give a short introduction of the author of the book, and then there will be a 30 minutes talk by Ms. Shrayana and Professor Tarun Jain. Afterwards, we will take a question answer session. Ms. Shrayana Bhattacharya trained in development economics at Delhi University and Harvard University. Since 2014, in her role as an economist at a multilateral development bank, she has focused on issues related to social policies and jobs. Earlier, she worked on research projects with the Center for Policy Research, Seva Union, and the Institute of Social Studies Trust. Her writing also appeared in the Indian Express, Economic and Political Weekly, Indian Quarterly, and the Caravan. Thank you. Now, I request to Ms. Shrayana Bhattacharya to take over the session. Ms. Shrayana, please take over.
Thank you so much, Reena. Before I actually maybe return to Tarun, I just want to take a minute to thank all of you, Viral, Reena, Hiral, Bhavesh, the full team at the library for organizing this and for inviting me. Many thanks to Tarun for taking the time, and actually he's played an important role in the writing of the book, which I think we'll get into in a second. And I just wish everyone good health, given that we're still dealing with the pandemic. And my hope is one of the principal characters in my book is an IIM graduate, a proud product, and it was a very important, critical moment for her. Being a student of the institute. And so my hope is at some point that I'll be able to come visit. With that, maybe I'll turn to Tarun because I think he wanted to kick off. Tarun, over to you.
Okay, so thank you all for joining us for this talk. Thanks to my friends in the library, Vikram Sarabhai Library, for doing all the hard work of arranging the talk, and Shrayana for obviously basically pinging us saying, look, my book is coming out. Would you like to have this talk? And I said, this is a great idea, otherwise I just sort of am a consumer, but here I get to be more actively engaged in, talking to her. And what's wonderful is that we'll talk more about the book in more detail. So the headline is obviously Shah Rukh Khan, that's why most of you are here. But it's also a social science book. Right. And so I'm really happy that many of my social science colleagues, Namrata, Navdeep, Chinmay, I think I saw Pritha as well, have been able to join this talk. And I'm going to lean heavily on them because, so much of what I read in the book is also what all my colleagues here do. So there's this yin yang, right? So you think you're being seduced into a book about Shah Rukh Khan, but it's actually about labor force participation amongst women and gender norms and things like that, which are so important. And that's actually what brings so much of us to work, that motivates our work. Our students are really interested in this. We talk about it in classes all the time. But it's in that sense very interesting to have your perspective, Shrayana. So, just let me introduce a little bit of my connection with Shrayana, I think. Thank you, Reena, for sharing the biography. But Shrayana is an economist, so she's a development economist by trade, right? I think that's where your salary comes from, although, of course, that might change and you might start getting big bucks from the publishing world. But, so we started to meet each other in conferences in Delhi. right? In like economics research conferences in Delhi, and chat after the panel was over. यहाँ पे free food and drinks section is where we would find ourselves and chatting. So that's how we got to know each other. Um, so you know, and we talked. Many of the themes that we were going to conferences were the themes of this book, right? And what I liked, and what's the departure, I think, from the more dry economics research papers is, Uma just put a comment out, says the search for intimacy, and it's saying that look, beyond the numbers, what else is happening? The sort of totality of people's lives. And that's what I liked about the book, right? So that's what adds the flavor. I mean, I read enough Journal of Economic Perspectives articles every day, but this is like a new perspective that I never got before, and so that's what I enjoyed about the book, and we can certainly talk more about it, right? So I have to just say that I haven't read the book completely. So a simple reason is, I knew the book was coming out. I put in a purchase request in the library. It came, I got pinged, and I ran to the library, picked it up, and 4 days later, I hear that there's a recall on the book, and so I better return it quickly. So I did this like mad dash of trying to read as much as possible. And so I think I was done through like 80% of the book. I got all the major characters, right? So in that sense, I think I'm well equipped to have the conversation, but if there's a reference or two I missed out on, my apologies in advance. So Shrayana, just let me sort of, invite you to talk a little bit about the book. My quick read on this is that it's Shah Rukh Khan meets the American Economic Association. So is there a way that you could briefly summarize it for the readers who haven't read the book yet, about both the yin yang of the book?
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Tarun. Tarun, you're right. I wanted to write a story about women in the economy. And of course, the economy is a subset of society. And I think if I were to look at it, my job and my trade is one of an economist, but honestly, I think as a discipline, I've really never known a home. So the book sort of straddles sociology, some parts of anthropology, different kinds of disciplines, and it brings to bear literature from all these different fields, and of course, economics as well. The book actually, to give the reader a sense of the book, I need to go back to 2006. And in fact, in the city that you are in, Tarun, in Ahmedabad, that's actually the genesis of the book. Because in 2006, I was a research assistant for a project, in fact, with the Self-Employed Women's Association. I was sent to do a survey on wages and working conditions of women who were home-based agarbatti makers. They were making incense sticks at home, earning about a quarter of minimum wage. And I was extremely enthusiastic. I believed in the power of data. And I thought, with this survey, I would suddenly, the conditions of all these women would be visible. And I felt extremely exhilarated with this very early phase. I was in my early 20s. When I went to these areas to start the survey, I realized all these women were unionizing, Tarun. They were extremely well aware of their own economic deprivations. They really did not need an outsider to come in and ask the questions. And in fact, there were quite a few jokes about surveyors of my background coming in to ask questions because they'd seen so many of us before. And so it was just, my exhilaration met a bit of a jolt. And I decided, well, to ease things up, let's just talk about something we have in common. And I started asking people about their favorite actor, and Mr. Khan emerged because he was just so popular. So everywhere I went, Tarun, starting from the slums of Ahmedabad, moving to the villages of Uttar Pradesh, to the forests of Jharkhand, different regions, different kinds of women in fairly precarious economic circumstances, they all love Mr. Khan. And I realized, in fact, when I started to have these conversations, and then these conversations lasted for more than a decade, as you know, in the book, I follow these women and their lives, their economic trajectories and their personal trajectories. For more than a decade, I actually realized that when they were talking about Mr. Khan, when I say in the book, they're seeking Shah Rukh, what does that mean? That is not some silly crush on a celebrity. It is actually a quest for economic independence, to assert your economic independence, because to watch Shah Rukh, Tarun, you need money, you need free time, you need access to markets, you need access to technology. all the attributes of the formal economy, right? That all of us, that economists study. And I realized that they were telling me these really beautiful textured stories about the things these women had to do to actually in their quest to try and watch Mr. Khan. So that was one part. And I think the stories in the book bear out how much women have to struggle to just have fun. Because it's an area that seems to be somewhat taboo for them to watch an actor. It sounds really banal, but I think the stories in the book bear out the frictions in the economy as well as in society, and just women being able to have fun. And in the book, Shah Rukh is essentially an idea or a construct, almost a research device that captures women's ability to, can you have a job? Can you have liquidity? Can you just spend the money that you want to? The second piece I realized when they're seeking Shah Rukh, or I say they're seeking Shah Rukh, is that they're looking for an equally rewarding intimacy. And what I mean by that is, if you look at time poverty numbers for women, I call this in the book the feminization of exhaustion. Women are just exhausted. I think, Tarun, you know, and I think many of your colleagues today would know, there's so much work increasingly now on the mental health aspects of the labor market story, as well as the mental health aspects of just discrimination at large. And the women I was speaking to just felt that they were not adequately supported by the structures of society, be it their families, certainly the state. And in Mr. Khan, they essentially found this fantastical figure who would essentially capture this idealized masculine figure, who would support them, who would allow them to rest, who would love them, who would acknowledge their feelings because of his persona. And so, Tarun, you're absolutely right. The book is a chronicle of what Indian womanhood has felt like, perhaps, without sounding too lofty, since liberalization. And one of the things that I notice in the book, and that's very important to me, is that in the way we write about the economy, you know, the economy, as you know, Tarun, very well, the economy is not a set of consumption estimates or growth estimates. I know the budget's coming up. And if you look at the conversations around the budget, we all forget, right, that the economy is not just the stock market. It's not these soulless numbers. The economy is a construct that holds a lot of feelings, sentiments, psychological attributes, be it love, loneliness, longing, the desire for fun, interpersonal frictions, jealousy, anxiety, all of that. It's being held in the economy. It finds its way into jobs figures. It finds its way into consumption figures. And my simple task with the book, Tarun, was the book starts right up on the first page. You would have seen it's that graph of female labor force participation rates that have just dropped dramatically. We all know those numbers. We've all consumed them. There's so much work, excellent work that's been done on this. But I just wanted to convey to a reader who may not be that familiar with the economic literature, what has that drop felt like the feeling of it, right? Like, and I think the only way you can convey that is you convey the statistics, but you convey the stories. And in Mr. Khan, I just found this framework that seemed to capture this longing for freedom, for jobs, for an equal intimacy. And essentially the book is in service to try and give the reader a sense of what being a woman has felt like in India. The women I follow are all Mr. Khan's fans, but I'm sure that there could be other ways of approaching this. It's just because he delights me tremendously and I've always been a fan, and this was something I found in common with this very diverse pool of women. I wrote it a certain way. But you're absolutely right, which is it's not about him as an icon, but him as a construct, and a construct that speaks to women's desires for economic and personal freedom.
Yeah, so I think I should clarify for folks what Shrayana mentioned about economic growth has been happening since liberalization. I mean, we have been one of the fastest growing economies the last couple of years, notwithstanding, over the last 30 years. And in some ways, the promise of liberalization, the promise of all this fast growth is that, our lives will be better, all of our lives, not just some of us, it's all of our lives will be better. And, the tough part of the tough lesson has been that there's been a divergence between men and women, right? That women across the economic spectrum have had lower propensity to get jobs and participate in, paid work over the last 30 years than ever was before. I mean, you would think that this is odd, right? I mean, a growing economy creates space for everyone, and that hasn't happened. And instead, what has happened is that not only were women not working much in 1991, they're working even less now. And so this promise that, we will therefore, because of all this growth, have, space for women earning nice jobs, having nice jobs, having nice salaries, and therefore being able to be empowered in a more, sensible way. It's sort of not panned out, right? Now, of course, you can say that, well, maybe it's that poor women became, or poor households became richer. And so therefore, women said, look, I don't need to work. And that could have been part of the story. But I think what your book was bringing out is that it's not just poor households who, made those decisions. It's also women who are relatively higher up on the income and education ladder who are suffering from much of the same challenges, right? So the point is not about need to work versus desire to work versus ability to work. Is that this thing isn't working out for no matter who you are. And I think, the statistics are in line with what you've been saying about in the book.
Yeah, but Tarun, I think I want to make 2 points about this. When I use that phrase, feminization of exhaustion, right?
Mm-hmm.
What am I hinting at? I'm hinting at also the fact that right now, if you look at the age group, which is somewhat my age group, women in their 30s, between 30 to say 39, we know 7 out of 10 of these women are attending to what we would call domestic duties. So it's not like they're not working. They're laboring all the time. They're laboring without income. And it is a kind of work that is not acknowledged. It is, in the book, what I call, I say that, the surface of the economy is men earning money, but the invisible part of it is women earning love and women laboring for love, right? So care, labor, loving, this requires effort. Anyone who's had a love affair, anyone who's run a family, anyone who takes care of a plant or an animal knows, or a person knows, that love is tremendous amounts of labor. So I think what's happening is women are working, but that work is not acknowledged. If you look at the budget discussions, and I'm going to keep coming to that because I think that's a really good illustration of this, we don't hear conversations on how do we reduce domestic drudgery for women if employment and the welfare of women, the economic welfare of women, which in the book I'm really trying to argue that the economic welfare is very strongly related to personal welfare as well, to personal freedoms. If that is not a policy goal which is articulated, it'll always just be second thought. And you see that right now in the budget discussions that are happening. I don't hear about elderly care. I don't hear about domestic infrastructure. In some states, you may hear about it. There's some lip service given to transfers for women. Some states are experimenting with it. But overall, rethinking, reimagining the economy to acknowledge the work that women are currently doing, I don't see that. So that's one. I think that's really important. I think the second is there are lots of reasons why we've had a growth phase post 1991. And women, you're absolutely right, Tarun. I mentioned in the book, there are statistics which show in the top 10 fastest growing sectors, women have only gained less than 19% of jobs in those sectors, 19, right? Like, so the employment gains, the paid employment gains from liberalization have accrued to men. Now, there could be some people who are very comfortable in our political and social contract with that equilibrium, where it's fine if the country grows. I mean, of course, right now we're not growing, but it's fine if the country grows and women assume the roles that they are right now, and that's okay. But I would argue through the book that that's a really serious psychological crisis of confidence, of love, of self-worth, that the economy is actually almost solidifying and recreating time and time again by, number one, not acknowledging the work that women are currently doing. And then when they're making decisions in their careers, Tarun, and I'm sure this is true, in fact, across class groups, for example, and you're right, in the book I mentioned, CMIE data shows, with all its sort of issues with CMIE, it shows that in the top echelon, the top 20% of the country, married women, only 6.5% hold a job. And some of it could just be, it's a voluntary withdrawal. I feel I'm so busy working and caring that this is what I want to do. But the stories in the book tell me, as you know, the first part of the book is about elite upper middle class women, then it sort of goes down the socioeconomic spectrum. What I realized when I talked to these women was they were telling me, well, I would like to work, but who will keep track of household chores? And we should remember India right now is in the bottom 5 when it comes to the share of men and the government helping in care. So I think it goes back to this fact that if we really want an economy that works for women, right now the economy works for men. And I write in the book that India has liberalized for its men, it has grown for its men largely. There are welfare effects that women have gained because of that, but then that's because there's been sort of an income channel through a man holding a certain kind of job. But women stepping out and asserting themselves in the economy, that would require reimagining how we weigh care work, how we think about the trade-offs and decisions that women are making. And I think it would require us to just rethink the frameworks of the economy. And I think the book is essentially an effort to try and just push us to have these conversations.
So, any thoughts from my colleagues here? I mean, would love you to guys to just jump in. Unmute yourself and just join in as you wish. So I also see Professor Kavita Ranganathan, who has just joined the panel as well. So welcome, Kavita.
Thanks,
yeah. So you're absolutely right. So Shrayana, can you speak a little bit about, say, the role of education, the role of some of that in young people's lives? If I take a look at who's listening, a lot of them are IIMA staff, IIMA students, IIMA alums, right? And this is part of your top echelon of earners. So if folks at this edge cannot solve this challenge, who can?
Tarun, it's interesting. I actually have a slightly different take on this. In fact, I feel where a lot of economic churn and fight essentially is happening, the struggle is really playing itself out. It is actually in low-income communities and sort of the emerging middle class. And the book bears that out. And of course, I don't want to make generalized statements. The book has a set of stories and a set of statistics, of course. But if I look at our own communities, I do think you see this, right? There's studies that show this. Tarun, maybe you've authored one of these studies that shows this, that women at the entry level, you have large number of management graduates, IT graduates, be it in engineering, you have lots of women entering at the entry level position. As you go through the years of being in service and going up the hierarchy, you just see this attrition, right? Women are just dropping out. This is true certainly of the kinds of jobs people like us of our class group would hold.
Yeah, and the big edges are on date of marriage and date of first childbirth.
Exactly. And I think that one, I feel, and this goes back to, I know, an experiment that you did with Diva and Seema and others, which is that can we think about ways where we socialize younger men of our class to do much more of the care work, to share that burden? I do see those shifts happening. There was a study, I think Ashwini Deshpande studied during the pandemic, how much men were helping with care work. And they actually found that for a brief period of time when everyone was locked at home, men the number of minutes that they were involved in care work did increase. So this is not some fantastical dream, it can happen. And men do help in different parts of the country in different ways. But I do think the socialization story there about what are men's jobs and what are women's jobs, the care angle and the equalization of that is going to be very critical if we want women to hold on to the jobs that they want to amongst our milieu of the formal salaried kind of employment or sort of top entrepreneurs. I think the second, and you're starting to see this with education, is that the tyranny of marriage, right? That there's marriage and then women will just drop out. And there's a socialization there as well. There's almost this expectation. I noticed it in the book. All these women said to me, well, I left work. And then when I asked them, and do you know how you left your job? And she said, well, I don't know. It just happened. And this almost automatic assumption that after marriage, the mothering and the caring, that this is largely something that's delegated to women. Unless we start to at least negotiate that, and only I think our at least people with class privileges can. And even when you have a maid or a nanny or all of that, we know who's actually keeping track. And it's rare that men are really participating in that activity. So that's the second piece. And the third, I do have tremendous faith in the private sector here, because providing care facilities, there is a Maternity Benefits Act that has scaled up efforts. I hope that there were commensurate paternity benefits as well, right? Like at least men getting equal paternity leave, things like that. So I think some combination of the private sector. My hope here really doesn't lie with the state, to be perfectly honest. I think my hope here lies much more with private negotiations within households, maybe curricula through school. Maybe that's where the state can come in to play a role. Popular culture, and this is why Mr. Khan, I want to again highly, highly recommend everybody go watch DDLJ and notice the number of times he's in the kitchen, despite all the other things that he's doing that are really not progressive. But men in popular culture also showing up in a way which gives younger men of our class group or others the signal that men are supposed to share in this burden. And I think that will take time, but I am hopeful because I do see in pockets that's happening. Like, just as an aside, one of the characters in my book, she actually said she wants to marry a South Indian man because she's heard that South Indian men, because they're all programmers and they live on their own, they're able to cook and clean their own, they manage themselves. So she really valued that. So, so there are signals, right, in the marriage market that can work if these norms change. But I think it will be the private sector and individuals and society that will have to sort of push that. The state can help, but I don't think it's going to come in a top-down way. Thanks.
Yeah. So, the point about paternity benefits, I think the interesting study over here is that it's like, if you give men also paternity benefits, they use it to like forward anyway influence their, like, sort of forward their careers. If you give women maternity benefits, I mean, that's just like time that they took off from work. That's and similarly for work from home as well, that work from home meant a stoppage in women's work lives, and for men it meant work more from home. You were able to avoid the commute.
But Tarun, actually, just speaking of commute, there's one thing that I missed out, and I think it's really important. I know this is work that Rohini Pandey and various others are doing. It's so important. We know that the way jobs are structured in India, there are clusters of opportunities, right? Jobs exist in certain areas. Single female housing still continues to be such a challenge, and it's such a friction. I mean, even for me, and I've been saying this every time I speak about the book, I mention this, I'm from like the highest echelon of our economic pyramid. And for me to find a house on my own was a nightmare in Delhi, in seemingly progressive neighborhoods. And so if we can't allow girls to live on their own, to migrate out, to follow opportunity, that in itself is a big binding constraint. And yes, there's work that seems to suggest that if the wage is high enough, then women, the incentives will be for you to then fight with your family and move forward. Right now, we don't see that wage premium. And in fact, what perhaps the government ought to be thinking about doing, and this is when I think the state can come in to do something, which is you subsidize some of the costs for girls so that the incentive can work out for the household to at least support her job opportunities and that pathway. Yeah. That's an interesting way to go.
Or it can also be, a lot of these gender wage gap studies, right? One of the most interesting parts has been wage non-disclosure. That because I see in the chat box, this element of like private companies. What private companies often do is to restrict their employees from talking about the wages.
Yes.
So women never find out that the men were paid more, right?
Yeah.
So one of the more straightforward private sector policies can be to end these, clauses in contracts that you cannot talk about your wages, which helps to shed light on what the prevailing wages are.
Absolutely. And in fact, not just in, I mean, even one of the things that's interesting, pay for parity in one of the sectors, which is the highest, is pilots. And I don't know if people know this, but India has one of the largest share of pilots in the world. And I get into this in the book. And one of the reasons is actually the union agreement happens together. So they know precisely what you're saying. So it's an example to prove what you're suggesting. And I do think more information, but I also think subsidies to try and ease the pathway and some of the frictions. And in some cases, you may have to think of some very radical notions and even think of affirmative action in some parts. But that's, I think, to be tested and tried out.
Yeah. So any thoughts from my colleagues here? Prita, Namrita, Chinmay, Navdeep?
It sounds fascinating, actually. I haven't read the book, but I am very, very curious now. And, I remember growing up, as the Shah Rukh Khan, being the Shah Rukh Khan fan, because he came up when we were younger. And so there was just one thing which was going around in my head, because in the title you have Shah Rukh Khan. Did the attitudes to Shah Rukh Khan change as you went along talking to them?
Shall I go ahead, Tarun, or do you want to collect a few questions?
No, go ahead.
No, thank you so much, Pritha, and happy to know that you're a fan. I've noticed that I think there's like a sisterhood. I usually always get along with women who are fans. It's like a way, it's a signal. Pritha, yes, they did change, particularly of our class group. The thing that I think that's important to note when you read the book, it's structured, as I was telling Tarun, seen it. The first half of the book is about women from, the sort of top 10% of the country, right? Typically upper caste, upper class women. Then it moves to sort of trader caste families, which is the emerging middle class. And then the third section of the book is low-income women who are living in fairly harsh economic circumstances, and I follow their lives. What's interesting is that I think it's amongst at least my milieu, English-speaking, upper middle class and elite fans, where the shift was from buying into the candy floss romance, right, when you're young, into now actually appreciating the interviews and the interventions that are made on professionalism, the economy, because he's always talking, and I actually quote a lot of these interviews in the book, just things about how people should be in the workplace and how women should be treated in the workplace. We should remember, I think one of the first things he invested in as a CSR initiative was sanitation and toilets for women, which is interesting, right? Like, and he was doing this before it was trendy to talk about these things. So a lot of women really responded to that. And I think the attitude shifted, which is that they admire him now more, strangely, almost as a political figure, as someone who represents something, not, I think, as an actor or as a matinee idol, to be very honest. And the other part that really did shift was I noticed that a lot of women would say to me when I was younger, I didn't understand the really dangerous content in films like Dar, but there's a lot of stuff that's going on which is really not acceptable. I mean, it's really uncomfortable. And I noticed that there's tremendous agency in gays. And this actually I noticed even amongst women of different class groups. They would say, well, when I saw the film, I didn't immediately pick up on it because he was so cute or whatever when we were younger. But as you grow older and you have your own experiences with perhaps harassment, dealing with men in public places, one of the women actually said to me that she used to get the same kind of calls that he makes to some character in a movie, calling and stammering and things like that. And she got really angry at him at that time. And I describe it in the book. And she said that she realized that she needed to now distance that part of his icon. So it's actually something that you'll see. So I noticed this change. But amongst lower income communities, the one thing, Pritha, I do want to note is that very few of them actually have the money and the time or the access to public space to watch a full film. They don't have mobile phones. We know there's a huge gap, right, on mobile phone access. They're not accessing the internet. And so almost, I call it the oil of 21st century independence, the internet, data, platforms. They just don't have access to it. So as a consequence, they're not able to see, so they see his songs. And you'll have to read the book to sort of see how they interact with it. They work so hard to be able to watch a film. It's actually really moving. And I almost start to tear up when I talk about it. So yes, there was a shift, but I think it was much more, articulated amongst more elite, English speaking fans, but the distancing from the dangerous parts of the icon over time, I think that happened across class groups. Thanks.
Hey, hi, Shrayana. Thank you so much for making the time to have this conversation with us. So I, again, haven't got through the whole book, but I actually listened to the entire 4-hour interview on Seen and Unseen. I like that podcast a lot. So I have a fair sense of where you're coming from. So I have, I do admire the data orientation of your arguments. I myself work on time use data and have made the same observations that you had. Also with the more recent, so of course the CMI data is there, but the new time use study, the TUS data, that has some very interesting variables on caregiving and multiple activities and simultaneous activities and so on, and very similar observations to what you observe both empirically as well as through your more in-depth interviews. Similar to what Pritha was asking in terms of just attitudes towards Shah Rukh. I mean, I'm not coming from them. I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan for my own reasons, which are, I always, even as a youngster, I found those ideas to be a bit lofty, sometimes quite patronizing. So although, he always fell for a woman who had an independent mind, in the end, that woman always ended up in a sari with sindoor and performing rituals. So never quite identified myself with those characters. But wanted to get a sense of, you interviewed all of these women who had something that they admire about him and his personality and how they draw parallels. What about the other set who just like, no, this is all just mumbo jumbo, this is so not real. And this is not the reality that we are living in. And I mean, they're not really seeking Shah Rukh Khan. They're just like, critical, or what kind of stories which may not have featured in your book did you come across? I'm just curious about that.
No, thanks so much, Namrata. That's such an important point you make. I want to make couple of observations. One is, none of the women, when we think of fans, right, of not just Shah Rukh, but any kind of matinee idol, even Cary Grant, like think of anyone. There is this idea that, and I don't know, maybe it's the way celebrity journalism operates in India and the way or even just the world, that there's this like constant deification of the star, as if everybody who even admires this person has just been seduced and enchanted, right, by almost everything. But in fact, when you read the book, you realize women are picking and choosing. So you see a lot of women will say, I don't like the films, precisely, in fact, for all the reasons you just articulated. In fact, so many of the women say nobody ever tells you what kind of husband Raj will ever be for Simran from DDLJ. And it's in the book. I actually quote this, which is that I think women are extremely pragmatic about the reality of their lives. I don't think anyone views this as sort of, nobody identifies with this reality because they know it's constructed. But they value some of the candy floss and the open arms because in their real lives, they feel very unheard, unsafe, unloved. I think there is a psychological, some sublimation, projection. I say in the book, we are all constructing him, and I think this is part of the construction. So that's one thing that I just wanted to outline. The second thing I wanted to outline was there's actually a character, I don't know whether you've reached that part of the book yet. There's a character who she's a unionizer. She's called Zahira. She loves him, but she loves the songs, and she's very clear. She says, this is just fun. I mean, it's not serious. Like, she doesn't take it as some kind of serious text, right, of like a man and how he should be. Her daughter, on the other hand, has completely bought into that sort of world. I mean, in a very pragmatic way, in that for her, what it means is that she needs to marry someone she loves. And I think that's actually quite remarkable, given we still live in a country where romantic agency for women is so compromised, particularly the socioeconomic landscape that this mother-daughter couple, they're from Ahmedabad, actually, what they're occupying. So I heard a lot of, we don't buy into it, but we admire certain things, so we will focus on those certain things and we will love him, right? Like, for that. So that's one. And then I met a lot of women who I actually say in the book, I mean, there's that line I have, which is that I feel like he really unites women in admiration, but also anger. And anger because it's born out of expectations. So a lot of women would say to me, well, I expected him to do better and I expected him to do this, and then he didn't. As if, you know this person and he should be sort of responding to your expectations, and he doesn't. So I heard a lot of that. And of course, everywhere I went, wherever there was a Shah Rukh female fan, there was someone who didn't like him. And I think the women who don't like him, I didn't find anyone who had very strong reservations, because I think it's just they felt that they had too little, I mean, their lives were too stretched, so to sort of show emotional energy into this one actor. But I do want to say that when I say someone is a fan in the book, it's not the typical notion. I really think celebrity journalism has really pushed forward, which is this mass of screaming people outside his house. Actually, I've interviewed the people who stand outside his house. It's remarkable the reasons why they're there, and that's in the last chapter of the book. I'm not going to give it away. You'll read it. And but yes, so I do hear you when you say what you say about the fact that you don't buy into that world. In fact, none of the women in the book really buy into it. They just admire, and they're picking and choosing. They're liking the fact that he's talking about wages for women, even if it's patronizing. I think what a lot of the women would say to me is, who else is talking like that? And I think you and I, perhaps, Namrata, come from an environment, I mean, I don't know you, but I'm just going to sort of speak, which is that I think maybe we come from an environment where we are somewhat more heard in our immediate families, and I have a family that supports my career, that supports my decisions. So many of the women in the book, you would see, they don't come from those environments. And these are environments where they're not really reading feminist texts, or they're not, consuming theater or other kinds of culture. So film is a language that is so dominant, right, as a script for them. So it doesn't surprise me that they project so much onto this one man who seems relatively more progressive than the other modes of masculinity back then. Now I think things have changed. And so that's why I think he's very potent. But I don't think anyone is really buying into all of it. But thank you. And I look forward to your full feedback on the book.
Thanks,
Shrayana,
for the response.
So Shrayana, so there's a comment by Garima Agarwal. I think this is in line with what you were just talking about. So let me just read out Garima's comment. So for the average Indian woman who might have fairly limited bargaining power in intimate relationships, at what point do you give up on this teenage fantasy or give up on the teenage fantasy of this ideal man? Or do your stories find that even older women demand better from their partners in some way?
That's such a terrific question. And I think maybe I'll have to write a second book to properly answer it. Based on the stories that I know, I actually say this, I get into this there's a chapter where I'm wrapping up the section on upper middle class and elite fans. And I actually say that somehow this fandom for this idealized masculine, person has kind of left this imprint on a lot of women where they're always fangirls in relationships. They're always expected. There's this almost, and a lot of women said to me, I automatically put this man on a pedestal, whoever this man is in my life. And the humanity of him always disappoints me because you kind of always expect, this spectacular character, which I think is so it has one aspect, which is that in fact, the fantasies linger on and perhaps sometimes in a somewhat unhealthy, unrealistic way. I definitely heard that. And then the second is there are so many stories in the book. I'll give you an example. There's a Rajput woman who comes from a very posh family. It's a really beautiful story, I felt, just because of the way she's negotiated her life. And she married someone she really didn't want to. I mentioned her in the book. There's a lot about her. She wanted to study philosophy and she's obsessed with Martha Nussbaum. So she had a Martha Nussbaum poster and Shah Rukh's poster right next to each other when she was younger. Unfortunately, she could not study philosophy. Her family felt, she comes from a family where she had to get married. Her father was in debt and they felt like she needed to get married to a very wealthy family. She did. And she says to me that each time she watches Kal Ho Na Ho, which was a film that came out that year when her marriage was fixed, she says, I feel like I'm dying with the actor. There's a version of her and that fantasy is dying. So a lot of women just capitulate. And in fact, most women, I would say in the book, you'll see it. They are all, there's this, I actually say when I set up the book in the intro, there's a preface, I actually say all these women are yearning for some idealized lover, but in real life, they are extremely pragmatic. They are constantly bargaining, strategizing for security, survival, protection. And they're extremely well aware that they live in a country where public space, irrespective of whether you're in the north, south, maybe pockets in the northeast are somewhat different. It does not matter. Public space is not geared to give women freedom and independence. Housing is not geared to give women freedom and independence. So they will need to rely on family and men. And as a consequence, they're very practical and very pragmatic, which is sad because then it sort of leaves this constant loneliness, this lonely quest of the idealized other. So I actually think the answer, Garima, is both, which is that the fantasy sometimes in a very unhealthy way. I noticed I think Bhumi is saying that there's like this cognitive dissonance, right? I fully agree, which I do give voice to in the book. But then it does this other thing as well, where lots of women are just giving up, but then you want to hold on to the fantasy. And so you daydream. And in fact, I think the book is full of just women who are daydreaming about what that other life could be like. Because currently we don't live in an economy which will allow a woman to stand on her own 2 feet. It's a very sad fact. You can create that in enclaves for yourself, but we have to acknowledge as a country, we have really failed women who don't want to mother or marry, who don't think that that is the way they want to occupy space. But right now we don't have an economy that treats them as equal. As I use that example again, just try and find a house for yourself in Bombay as a single woman and you'll know what I'm talking about. And so I think given that there is this yearning, but in real life, everyone is tremendously pragmatic because you live in the constraints that you occupy and you have to then try and maximize your own welfare and gains in that.
There were a couple of comments about rental that, it's not just to try and find a house, but it's also how far you'll get it from your parents' house.
Yeah.
And then how much you actually have to pay is,
exactly.
Right? So
exactly.
It's either Kavita or Ankur who has the hand up. It says Kavita. So.
Sorry.
That's okay. So Ankur was actually busy making tea for us, so he couldn't log in on his own. So he's in my account.
Right.
Okay. Sorry, I've not read the book, Shrayana. Shrayana, sorry.
Yeah.
But I'm basing sort of, from what I've been hearing. So today there's a video on NDTV, which apparently is going viral about Asha, an accredited the social activists fighting with a A&M worker.
Yeah.
And, it's about and, we're also simultaneously doing this work. We're distributing material to these frontline workers. And what we're hearing is they haven't been paid for 6 months, 4 months, etc. Now, and so my question really is, whenever we know from history that the only time that change really comes about for a specific group is when there is bonding and there's some kind of solidarity.
Yeah.
And instead, I feel like the structures that we've created are only putting women in competition with themselves as well.
Yeah.
Whether it be the woman who's trying to work at different in terms of classes, the household work, the SAS, whatever it might be, right? And and this was not always in terms of policy, and since this was not. I think this has been obviously recognized from a long time, and I think we must acknowledge that policy has actually gone in a different direction.
Yeah.
There was one of the largest programs for women in India was the Mahila Samakhya program.
Yeah.
Actually talked about nothing else but bringing women together.
Yeah.
We don't even have conversations of those sort.
Yeah.
Even when we are talking about bringing women together, we're talking about self-help groups and only using them as instruments of financial credit.
Yes.
So, whilst this hope that maybe there's this solidarity around Shah Rukh Khan is in some ways promising or hopeful, but I don't know if we are missing something here.
No, that's a great point. I actually mentioned this in the book. The book is not in service of solutions. I think all of us here having discussions perhaps will push that in more helpful directions than the book is to try and give you a sense of experiences and also to ask better questions. And one of the key questions that I am actually very interested in asking is fun as a source of solidarity. So for example, when you talk about Mahila Samakhya, or even when I talk about Seva, when you talk to a lot of women who were involved, and I used to work for a feminist think tank where we studied Mahila Samakhya as well as a program, and STEP, which was the other version of the government program, which was trying to incubate women's collectives in a way, not in an instrumental way, but essentially just to have solidarity communities, right, that would work together. One of the reasons why a lot of women wanted to join was because it was also fun. You could talk about each other's experiences. There was a sense of bonhomie. When I stand outside Mannat, I see all these young men and women together, and it's fun. And I think what worries me increasingly is that conversation around solidarity, I think, has also sort of dipped, because do we really want people, number one, to come together? And number two, do we really want people to have fun? I think the answer to that right now, and the Indian state's answer, my sense is, it really is not comfortable with women having fun. And I think that is linked to solidarity. Look at the stuff that's coming out of courts about normative behavior of women and this rubbish that you're hearing, right? Particularly from lower courts, which I do think reflect a lot more of our social attitudes than we would like to recognize. But I think they're telling you something. And so I fully agree with you. I think while solidarity is absolutely key through programs, through unions, through networks, I also think that currently government programs, and this is not just, by the way, just the central government, I think just broadly, even if you look at policy, there is a fear of women who will come together. And I think part of the problem, and I mentioned this in the book, part of the problem is caste, because what happens when you can keep everyone segregated? When you can keep everyone segregated, there's this notion of caste purity, these scripts that continue to move forward. When there's a lot of mingling, and solidarity and fun to me are sort of two sides where there is all this mingling, right, that can happen. It starts to suddenly challenge and subvert a lot of these pre-existing social scripts. So my sense is the reason you don't hear that much conversation in that same programmatic way around solidarity is I actually think that there's almost an incentive to keep segregation and to not have women who are essentially collectivizing. Having said that, I will also add one thing, which is that if you look at the stories around the book, my hope is not that there's some collective around Mr. Khan. I mean, that would be a fantastical ideal. Maybe that's an idea to think through. but I think my hope is essentially to say when you have different communities of women coming together to just have, there's joy in it, right? So if you look at the blank noise movement, these were movements that were trying to occupy public space. There have been different kinds of movements like this. There's a kind of joy that that does bring to women when they're asserting space and they're sort of sharing experiences. My hope with the book, in fact, is that it is my at least little meager attempt at trying to say that we're all in this together, because a lot of the feedback I've been getting on the book is many people say that the experiences are very universal. And I think more popular culture and more art in that area perhaps will help. But I agree with you that I don't see that kind of, I don't think the government is investing in these areas unless it's from that very instrumental idea of collecting interest and loans and so on and so forth. My hope here is much more in culture, civil society, and movements. I don't see where else it will come from. And if Mr. Khan wants to lead an entire union of women, more power to him. But I'll wait for that.
I mean, beyond Shah Rukh Khan, where is Bollywood going?
Oh God, are you asking me?
Tarun? Yeah. What do you think?
Tarun, I'm not. Okay, so firstly, I want everyone, I'm hardly, lots of people with this book ask me these questions about Bollywood and Mr. Khan. And I have to say,
we want to know
nothing.
Yeah,
I know everyone wants to know, but I know nothing. The only sensible things in the book, and I have to really give credit to Siddharth Roy Kapoor, Anupama Chopra, Mayank Shekhar, Raja Sen, all these film critics and film producers who spoke to me. Because of them, I'm able to say anything intelligent. They were interviewed for the book and they're in the book. Where is Bollywood going? I think romance has gone from Bollywood. That's the one thing I will say. If you look at the films right now that are being made, and I measure how much women speak in, and this is a table at the end of the book, I measure how much women speak in Mr. Khan's films versus how much they speak in contemporary hits. Even these films that are apparently feminist, what you basically find is that it's about a women's issue, but you have a man talking through all of them. And it's only usually in love stories that men and women are engaging with each other because of the nature of the love story, right? Or a family drama, perhaps. But all of that has moved now, Tarun, to OTT, which means actually that there's a large population in India that does not have access to it. We should really have some vision correction when we think all of India is on OTT platforms. I have data in the book that's just not true. And as a consequence, the popular scripts of intimacy, how do you negotiate intimacy, men and women actually talking to each other about love, masculinity, we just don't have that anymore, because now we have these, I call them in the book, all these stories, which are terrific, but they're all, sort of capitalism's male losers, right? Unemployed men, sperm donors, gangsters, all of that, which they're terrific films. But love has gone from Bollywood. So where is Bollywood going? I don't know. I'm just waiting for Mr. Khan's next release. But what I do know is that if you look at the trend of women speaking in popular big budget Hindi film and intimacy, both have just been on a decline. We have these very sassy female characters, but we don't really have complex, just women who are feeling beings in these films anymore, very few. And I see Bhumi saying something about the politics of these films, which I think I'll just leave others to discuss.
Sorry, my cursor got lost. But yeah, there's like a reference to Chakti India. There's, references to just working class films disappearing. Lots of trends in Bollywood, sort of, taking a lot of this away. Yeah. So, Navdeep, any thoughts? You've been.
Hi, sorry. I've read the chapter on Zahira. I really enjoyed that, being in Ahmedabad and somewhat intersecting with some of those things. And also I've lived in CR Park in the past. So what it really helped me do in some ways is visualize certain things so it shows me how different my traversing those spaces and those people are being male. And one knows about male privilege and how much different one's experiences are, but the way in which you spell out your experiences in both those places and sort of movements from there and conversations, that kind of visualizes things in a way that that makes things much clearer, and one can see the distance between how I traverse something and the way in which what you did and how you visualize that. So that was a really fantastic experience for me. I will read the rest of the book as well, but I focus on the parts that I could sort of most closely related to. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much.
No, thanks, Navdeep. Tarun, I think I'm going to definitely make sure HCI sends a few more copies to IIM, because since it's getting
The
recalled into the
circulation rate is
library.
very high. I mean, you know, right now only get a week to read the book. It's a very fat book, but it's fun. I mean, it's fun to read, but yeah, it is quite a few hundred pages, few hundreds of pages, right? And there are lots of footnotes in the back and lots of sources. Not many pictures, but
no, none.
Yeah, but yeah, it is. It does take longer than a week. At least it would have taken longer than a week.
Yeah, so I'll work with Reena and make sure that there are a few more. And thank you so much, Navdeep. I really appreciated what you said. Thank you.
So Chinmay.
Hi, yeah, looking forward to reading the book and listening to the podcast. Maybe you've covered this in the book as well. I mean, I would imagine most women in India, are exposed much more to regional serial soap operas and so on, and then movies. So you have Shah Rukh and then you have Smriti Irani as a kind of everyday symbol. I'm just talking about the 2000s, growing up in that time. So how, I mean, is that the pragmatism of what Smriti Irani is doing, say, in a serial, and Shah Rukh is the escapism? Is that what you find in people? How do they alternate between these two, different media?
Yeah, firstly, Chinmay, I'm such a fan of your book, so I just wanted to say that. And so it's nice to see you here. A couple of things. Chinmay, they were watching TV, but this was largely low-income working class communities. I didn't hear that much TV, in fact, being watched, because there were, in the village of Rampur, they were increasingly now, by the time towards post-2010, there was this trend to try and sit together and watch one serial, and it was always one of these Saas Bahu serials. But there it was sort of seen more as we just want to see what homes in cities are like. No one was, and these were Muslim communities that I was speaking to. They did not see it as an instructive or anything that they could relate to. It was entertainment. It was as entertaining and as almost fantastical as Shah Rukh's films were, to be honest. Where I did see a lot of this getting a lot of traction was amongst upper middle class women. But I have noticed that it's interesting, and I can't say, correlation is not causation, and I'm not going to get into this. What I did notice was the women I was talking to, they were more interested in watching a lot of foreign TV shows. There's a lot of interest in even like a Sex and the City or an Ali McBeal. Whereas Smriti Irani and the Saas Bahu shows, usually the Shah Rukh fan is not, my sense was the upper middle class Shah Rukh fan is not watching a lot of that. If she's watching it with some kind of critical gaze. And in fact, I noticed in the way they were talking about this, it was almost like they felt that those TV shows were articulating what women in very difficult marital circumstances have to deal with. So I didn't actually hear too much about her, because I think there was a kind of person I was talking to, even amongst the elite, as well as the middle class and low income communities, where they didn't buy into that much. My sense is, to be honest, Chinmay, if I were writing a book about Salman, I actually do think that then things would be very different. I think I would hear, this is a thesis, I'm not sure, that has to be tested, it's difficult to do, but I just did not hear that much on TV serials. The TV serials that I heard a lot about were foreign ones, which many women would struggle to understand, but they almost improved their English trying to understand them. I heard that a lot. I didn't, and everybody was watching talk shows, all kinds of talk shows, Hindi talk shows, lots of news watching, of course. But the power of TV, while it is, of course, enduring, other than those villages that I was visiting, while people were watching it, no one was taking it particularly seriously. I think there's a very different kind of milieu there, and they just don't seem to reflect that much in my book. Thanks.
All right, so thank you so much. I see a whole bunch of questions in the comments in the chat box. There's Aarti, Vipul, Prasid, Monica, all have great comments. We are a little bit, we're basically 5:30 now. We're beyond 5:30, and I promised an hour to everyone. So let's just wrap things up, and maybe if folks want to, still have questions, obviously in the comments chat box has been lit. So how can they get in touch with you, Shrayana?
Twitter is great. I think it's at B Shrayana. I do check. my DMs.
Maybe you can post your Twitter handle.
Yeah, I'm doing it right now to almost everyone, and then happy for anyone to get in touch, and I'll be happy to chat. I do think, and I noticed the questions, and my answer to the questions, which is always a wonderful answer to give, is it's in the book. So read the book, and then we can always chat.
This is the book talk after all. So, so great. You can see a copy of the book behind Reena. So you know what it looks like, but it's also easily Googleable. And there are excerpts floating around, right? So in various media websites have these. Navdeep has it checked out right now. So, there are all these.
It's my copy.
Sorry.
Oh wow.
It's doing well on Amazon. So congratulations, Shana. So
thank you. And I'm very happy that all these IIM professors are fighting over the copy. So this is making me, this is very good news, I think, for at least the perspective of a writer. Thank you.
No, we need to have you on campus. We'll
yes.
take you to CT for chai.
Done.
That's Cafe Tanstaffel. The economists know what that means. It's
yeah.
So we'll have you over sometime soon, and hopefully get you to sign our copies and
100%
get you to meet people. So I think a lot of the students would love to meet you. And
yeah.
So
no, I would love to be there, and I just want to thank you, and just want to say that I will mention principal character in the book is an IIM grad, and she has just been constantly saying to me that I must visit campus. So I hope to be there soon. So thank you very much, Tarun. And this was really helpful.
Demand to unveil this person, but I won't echo that.
No. No.
All right. So thank you so much, Shana. Thank you all to my dear colleagues for the wonderful engagement, and thanks so much to Reena, Bhavesh Bhai, Viral for engaging, for organizing this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Shrayana ma'am. It's a wonderful book talk, and we wish to next book for in future. So, and thanks to our IIMA faculty members, to all, that is Professor Kavita ma'am, Professor Ankur ma'am, Pritha ma'am, Chinmay sir, and Namrata ma'am, Navdeep sir, and thank you all the participants on behalf of Vikram Sarabhai Library. It's a very wonderful book talk.
Thank you, Reena. See you, everyone. See you at IIMA.